The United States represents roughly 25% of global GDP, yet the dollar is used in 88% of all international transactions. The euro, the world's second most used currency, is used in just 31%. This is not an accident. It is the product of a deliberate financial architecture built over 80 years, and it gives America a power no military force can replicate. In July 1944, as World War II raged across Europe and Asia, representatives from 44 Allied nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The world's economies were battered and unstable, haunted by memories of the Great Depression and the currency wars that had deepened their misery. Inside the conference halls, two men shaped the debate: Harry Dexter White, chief architect for the United States Treasury, and John Maynard Keynes, the British economist whose vision had dominated pre-war policy in London. The United States entered the negotiations with unmatched leverage. Its treasury held nearly 70% of the world's official gold, about 6,000 metric tons, while its factories ran at full tilt, untouched by the destruction that crippled Europe and Asia. Britain, by contrast, was mired in debt, its gold reserves depleted, and its financial independence mortgaged to American lend-lease. France and the other major allies arrived with shattered economies and little bargaining power. White insisted on a system anchored by the dollar, convertible into gold at $35 an ounce. Keynes pushed for a new supranational currency called Bancor, but the United States refused to surrender the advantage its gold hoard provided. The result was a compromise that would define the post-war order. Every nation would peg its currency to the United States dollar, and the dollar alone would be exchangeable for gold at a fixed price. The IMF and the World Bank were established to enforce this framework, with quotas and voting rights reflecting each country's reserves. The United States emerged with a controlling share, 75% of IMF voting power, and the largest stake in the World Bank's capital. The fixed parity design promised stability, but it also made the world's monetary system structurally dependent on the credibility of the dollar's gold convertibility. The system's legal architecture, enshrined in the IMF Articles of Agreement, required the United States Treasury to stand ready to exchange dollars for gold on demand. This commitment, forged in the aftermath of global crisis, would become the foundation of American financial power and the fault line that would later be tested when the world's demand for dollars outpaced the gold that backed them. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon addressed the nation and the world with a decision that would upend the global monetary order. Effective immediately, the United States would suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. The announcement, crafted over a tense weekend at Camp David with Treasury Secretary John Connally and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, responded to a crisis years in the making. Foreign central banks were redeeming dollars for gold at a pace that threatened to drain US reserves entirely. In the first half of 1971 alone, over $22 billion in gold and foreign exchange assets left the Treasury's vaults. The fixed exchange rate set at Bretton Woods collapsed in the aftermath. By early 1973, the world's major currencies floated freely, and the dollar, now a fiat currency, was untethered from any metallic anchor. But the end of Bretton Woods did not end dollar supremacy. Instead, American policymakers sought a new foundation, one that would ensure global demand for dollars even without gold. The answer lay in oil. In 1974, after a series of high-level negotiations, the United States and Saudi Arabia reached a confidential agreement. Saudi oil would be priced exclusively in dollars. In return, the US pledged military protection and support for Saudi development projects. A secret memorandum formalized the arrangement, locking in a system where every nation buying oil, then and now the world's most vital commodity, needed dollars to pay for it. The Saudis recycled their dollar earnings into US Treasury securities through the so-called Recycling Pact, deepening the financial link. By 1976, nearly 90% of global oil trade was invoiced in dollars. The petrodollar system replaced gold with oil as the anchor of dollar demand. This engineered resilience ensured that, even as the dollar became a fiat currency, its indispensability to world commerce and to the financial architecture that underpins it only grew stronger. The mechanisms forged in this era continue to shape the reach of American power, making the dollar not just a medium of exchange, but a tool of geopolitical influence. Every cross-border dollar payment relies on an intricate web of financial infrastructure. At its core sits SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT is not a bank, and it does not move money itself. Instead, it provides the secure messaging system that instructs banks around the world how, when, and where to transfer funds. Over 70% of all international financial messages pass through SWIFT, connecting more than 11,000 institutions and transmitting trillions of dollars worth of payment instructions each day. The United States, through its regulatory reach and alliance with European authorities, can compel SWIFT to disconnect targeted banks, turning a technical backbone into a lever of compliance. Yet messaging is only half the story. Actual settlement, the movement and final clearing of dollars flows through a handful of critical systems. FedWire, operated by the Federal Reserve, handles high-value dollar transfers between banks, moving an average of $4 trillion daily. CHIPS, the clearinghouse interbank payment system, processes about $1.5 trillion in private sector transactions each day. For foreign exchange, Continuous Linked Settlement, CLS, ensures trillions more are settled with minimal risk. Every major international bank, whether in London, Tokyo, or Dubai, must maintain correspondent accounts with United States banks to access these rails. Without them, a bank is effectively cut off from the global economy. This architecture gives the United States a unique form of leverage. The power does not come from the dollar's name or flag, but from control over the rails that move and settle the world's money. When Washington decides to block an institution from SWIFT or dollar clearing, that entity loses its ability to transact globally. The technical plumbing, codes, ledgers, settlement windows becomes an instrument of policy. It is this machinery that turns the dollar from a simple currency into an operating system for global finance, and, when necessary, a weapon. Sanctions now serve as instruments of economic force, reshaping the destinies of nations without a single shot fired. In 2012, Iran's banks were cut off from the global financial system, not just by American decree, but through tight coordination with the European Union. The result was swift and punishing. Oil exports collapsed, reserves became inaccessible, and basic imports stalled. Iran's gross domestic product shrank nearly 6% in a year, while inflation soared past 40%. The Office of Foreign Assets Control kept a growing list of sanctioned Iranian entities, and any bank or business that ignored these restrictions risked losing access to the dollar, a risk few dared to take. European and Asian corporations, from energy conglomerates to consumer brands, quickly withdrew, wary of secondary sanctions that could freeze their assets or lock them out of US markets. The scale of financial exclusion reached new heights in 2022. When Russian forces entered Ukraine, the US, the EU, and Japan moved in concert, freezing about $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves held in Western accounts. These funds, stored in government bonds and cash, vanished from Moscow's reach overnight. The Russian central bank lost access to nearly half its reserves, crippling its ability to defend the ruble or pay for imports. Secondary sanctions have extended this reach. In 2020, Turkish and Chinese firms found themselves abruptly cut off for facilitating Iranian oil shipments. Billions in assets were frozen, and international banks severed ties. In this environment, compliance departments have become the sentinels of global finance, as the dollar's operating system can isolate entire economies with a single directive. China's cross-border interbank payment system, known as CIPS, now connects more than 400 banks across 78 countries. In March 2026, CIPS processed a record 1.22 trillion yuan in a single day, handling over 42,000 transactions, evidence of a growing appetite for yuan-based settlement, especially in energy trade. Russia's parallel network, the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS, has expanded to over 200 domestic and foreign banks, routing billions in payments daily and providing a sanctions-resistant channel for Russian and allied commerce. Saudi Arabia, long the linchpin of the petrodollar system, has begun settling up to 5% of its oil exports in yuan, a move coordinated with Chinese refiners and executed through CIPS. The BRICS nations have launched a pilot currency basket through the New Development Bank, with $10 billion now disbursing loans in a mix of yuan, rubles, and rupees. These systems do not yet rival the scale or liquidity of dollar-based infrastructure, but they represent the first credible alternatives to the financial rails that have defined global commerce for decades. Dollar dominance endures not just through habit or history, but because of forces that alternatives have yet to match. The sheer depth of liquidity in dollar markets allows governments, corporations, and investors to move vast sums at speed, confident that buyers and sellers will always be found. This liquidity is reinforced by network effects. The more the world uses the dollar, the more indispensable it becomes. Every major clearing system, from Fedwire to CLS, is built to handle dollar settlements at a scale no rival can approach. Even as new systems like CIPS and SPFS expand, their reach is constrained by limited market depth and the absence of a truly global investor base. Policy choices also weigh heavily. Central banks and sovereign funds still hold the majority of their reserves in dollars, not only for security, but because alternatives lack the legal clarity and crisis-tested reliability that underpin trust. As a result, the search for substitutes is real, but the web of liquidity and habit keeps the dollar entrenched. The world's financial order stands at a crossroads. The tools for change are growing, yet the architecture of dollar power remains deeply rooted. The question is not whether alternatives exist, but whether they can ever rival the scale, safety, and reach of the dollar's system. Today, financial sanctions can isolate entire economies at the stroke of a pen. No army required. As rivals build alternatives and global tensions sharpen, one fact remains. The world's most powerful weapon is still measured in dollars. The only question is how long that monopoly will last.